John in California has a call here wanting to talk to Katy about something. Hopefully this doesn't
Hi, John.
take a weird left turn.
It won't. I'll be respectful.
Thank you, John.
Hi. A quick question regarding transgender females fighting in cis female sports, like MMA. And what's your take on it? I guess you answered it. Your call screener said you answered it on the TransAtlantic show, so I'll give that a listen. But yeah, I guess I'm still pretty ignorant on the matter.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. So yeah, I just did a huge rant on this on yesterday's TransAtlantic show about sports in general. This is quite a big topic, and for some reason, not like judging you here, but there's a certain type of cis man, and the first thing they go to when you say trans rights is they say, what about trans women in mixed martial arts? And I think that there's some kind of, I think there is a lot of men who the first thought is like, you know, men do lots of fighting and any man could sort of beat any woman in a fight. And that's the kind of the feeling they have. And it kind of feels to them a little bit like a man is going and fighting a woman, and that is just not on, and it makes them feel defensive. And I think that makes them sort of wary around this topic. So I guess the first thing I would say is that it might be kind of a gut reaction that's put your back up first. Even if you were right, that it was wrong for trans women to fight against cis women in like fighting, it might be that it's kind of a gut reaction that you've thought of this first. I'm not saying you have thought of this first, but I know that a lot of guys in the audience may well have thought of UFC or MMA first. I guess the next thing to say is that you've probably seen an example of someone, there was one famous mixed martial arts trans woman who fought, called Fallon Fox. I think she fought 3, she won 2 and lost 1 or something. It's very easy to sell the idea that trans women just dominate sports. People can just say that. They can say, men are stronger than women, therefore trans women dominate sports, therefore you should be opposed to it. And that kind of is enough evidence for a lot of people, but there isn't really any evidence. As we know, or as some people know, medical transition changes so much of your body. It changes your strength and all of these other kind of things. So people often use like cis men versus cis women in their examples. If you ask for statistics on this, people often go to strength profiles of men against women, or you know, how the grip strength of men against women. And in all of these cases, they're comparing cis people. So, there's very little data on like trans athletes, and it's very easy to find data comparing men and women. So I think people often make these arguments out of, well, you know, it's very easy to be misinformed on trans issues. Another thing to point out is I can name the mixed martial arts trans women who that everyone talks about, because there really hasn't been many. In fact, in sports in general, for example, in the Olympics, trans people have been able to compete in the Olympics since 2004, and yet not one has been good enough to even qualify yet. So we don't have this epidemic of trans people winning sports that is often portrayed in the media. In fact, trans women underperform in sports in pretty much every top level sport. Trans women are underrepresented in qualifiers and wins. However, that doesn't quite answer your question, which is this fair? So something that I was talking about on the TransAtlantic Call-In Show, which I'll try not to do the same rant again, because I ranted for like 20 minutes. But something that's worth noting is that physical performance isn't the only factor in sporting outcome. So, for example, we know that misogyny affects women's performance in chess, and that's why we have separate leagues for, we have like an open league of chess and then like a women's league of chess, and we have some evidence to show that when women think they're playing against other women, they perform better than when they're playing against men. So misogyny and irrational prejudice can be a factor in sporting performance, as well as can be money. Money is one of the largest factors. So all of these things are going to factor in as well. So when we say trans women underperform in sports, that doesn't necessarily mean they're weaker, they're worse at sport. It could mean that access to sport when they're younger is less, the access to sport today is less, the access to money, they're more likely to be homeless, it's going to reduce the number of people participating. There's a whole number of factors here. So we're going to be studying this for a long time, and it's going to be different for every sport. Potentially, we could do a load of science and we could find out that trans women are very good at UFC, but they're very bad at basketball. Like that, it might happen like that, and we might have to have separate rules for the two sports. And we're probably going to have a separate rule for every single sport. And then when it comes to fighting, we also have different weight categories, and there's all kinds of other restrictions. But one thing we can say is that it's very unlikely that a blanket ban of all trans people is it's probably not going to be the case, because not all trans people go through puberty like their natural puberty. Not all trans women are going to have gone through male puberty. So you're going to be comparing. So I'm going off on a bit of a side rant here. Anyway, so what I'm saying is it's going to be very difficult to have a blanket ban. So we are probably going to have to do some science and draw some like arbitrary lines in the sand in order to make the competition fair for everyone. And it turns out that biology is really complicated, and it's not just either man or women. There's a whole combination of factors, and so many different things affect sporting performance, and so many things affect the categorization of what sex class that someone's going to be considered to be in. And we've seen this with most famously Caster Semenya, who is an intersex woman. So she's a cis woman, and she has like a variation of sexual development, which means that she's, different to a lot of people. And that's caused this big controversy because she's very good at running, and some people say it's not fair that she competes, and other people say it is fair. And this ends up being kind of philosophical discussion about where is the line between men and women, and where is it fair to draw it. And so when we're talking about like women's sports and the focus is on trans people, we then have to turn to biology, and then it turns out it's just not very easy, and then it is going to affect intersex people, and some people don't even know that they're intersex, and then suddenly it gets into this whole kind of the legal side of things as well. Is it sensible to start testing all of the athletes to check their chromosomes and genitals and gonads and how they've developed? And it can be very, very complicated. So what I would say is, in sport in general, for low-level sport and for like non-violent sports, it's going to be very different to looking at the top-level sports and the fighting sports. The rules are just going to have to be designed possibly case by case or sport by sport, or just sort of a general inclusion, because there's loads of other benefits to sport, like health, which are potentially more important than someone winning their local soccer league or whatever you call football there. But then when it comes to top levels, we're probably just going to have to do a lot of science. And it might be that in some sports, certain people or people with certain conditions, we might have to make the call that it's not fair for them. But that's not necessarily going to be the case either. Sorry, that was a bit of a disjointed rant. I hope that's like addressed what you were thinking a little bit. Did you have any questions on what I've said?
It's perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
No,
yeah. So,
and I'd recommend.
Well, thank you so much.
I definitely recommend you run over and watch yesterday's episode of the TransAtlantic Show, because Katy went into more detail covering a lot of this earlier.
Yeah, I was trying not to just give the same rant again.
Yeah, because we've got to move on to other stuff. So I appreciate it, John. Thanks for the question. And by the way,
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
For every one of you whiny little shits in chat who are saying move on, get back to theism, I specifically mentioned that calls on this subject were going to be welcome today. And if you don't like it, you can go watch something else, because these issues are important as well. And if you don't think that they're tied to religion at all, then ask yourself, who are the most vocal opponents of trans issues and trans rights across the board? It's this stuff is important. And I'm sorry that we didn't take a slavery call for the 50,000th time today yet. And I'm sorry that somebody hasn't, that you would rather hear somebody tell me how I need to read the Bible when they haven't read it. Maybe you need to study up on trans issues just a little bit more, because trans rights are human right.
Bring your skepticism and energy for fighting against religious people on Twitter and stuff, and bring it to the trans wars, because this is the new spicy topic, mate. Arguing about religion is old hat.